The Otherkin, a two-part series in the Goddess Resurrection Chain series, link number 16. A series written and narrated by Krysta L VanDeusen. Part 1, Nightkin, Book 1, Demon Kissed, Prologue. Nick was bored. He'd been bored for hours, and had finally made his way up to the attic in the hopes of finding something to entertain himself. But as he looked around the box-crowded space, he felt that hope beginning to wither away into the dust that coated the floor. He thought of going back downstairs, but remembered that Nina was still pissed at him over the billboard incident, which had been Cade's idea, and sighed, feeling slightly depressed as well as bored. Moving to the back of the attic, he opened a box at random and stared for a moment at the books lying within. Some of the covers had pictures, others were so faded that he couldn't tell if they had once had similar decoration or not, and he lifted one out. It looked like either a journal or a diary, and he became curious, as all books in the house were supposed to be in the library on the ground floor. Even old journals and diaries like these seemed to be. Opening the book to the middle section, he settled himself on the floor and began to read, then grinned when he realized what he had found. Turning back to the first page, he took a pen and scrap piece of paper from his breast pocket and wrote a short letter, then replaced the pen and tucked his note into the crease between the cover and the page. Nick then returned his attention to the beginning page and settled in to read one of the most entertaining tales he'd ever had the privilege to help create in his very long life. A short letter found in the back of a very old diary. True stories are usually boring, dry, and tedious. This true story, though, is a bit more interesting, a bit more fantastic than the average true story, and when you read it, you might think it a work of pure fiction. However, it is not. It is a true story of love, life, and destiny. It's the story of how over 20 people met just one woman by seeming chance and fell in love with her. Yes, laugh or scoff if you must, but I tell you the tale is true, and ask that you join me in the telling of it. I promise you, you will not regret it. Sincerely, Dominic Goodfellow, heir of the Blackthorn bloodline. January 12th, 2023. You remember all the doomsayers on every street corner? How they said that the world would end in 2012? Well, they were wrong. Instead, it happened at midnight on December 21st, 2022. A whole 10 years later. I know because I was there when it happened a year ago. The night the world was nearly destroyed and the human populace found out that we were not alone. But then I had learned that too, only I had been much younger then, and the tale is in a different diary. Anyway, where was I? Oh, right. How the world fell into darkness and what happened next. It was discovered 2 weeks after the fall that a very stupid human sorcerer managed to simultaneously open 13 hell gates on the North American continent, causing the veil that separates the seen world from the unseen to fall and all hell to break loose all over the world, very literally. This day marks the 12th day of a new year, and now I can truly see how badly most fairy tales depict all of the demons, vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters, zombies, and the fae that were now free to roam the earth again. They were nearly unfettered and unchecked for 20 days. Reports gathered through eyewitnesses stated that the first gate opened in California, right in the center of Hollywood. Other reports state that the state suffered a massive earthquake and broke off from the mainland, that thousands were killed. New York also suffered a quake, but remains in good condition and the damage could be repaired over time. The second gate opened over Coney Island, sinking it below sea level and flooding it. Rhode Island also suffered the same fate. The third gate opened in the state of Massachusetts, and it is now under water, and so is half of Missouri. The other 10 U.S. gates have yet to be located, though it is suspected that one opened in Washington, D.C., as we no longer have leadership and our society is falling apart. The United States erupted into a very short-lived civil war and turned into separate small kingdoms, and everyone's now fighting over resources. What happened in the rest of the world when the gates opened here, we have no way of knowing nor of finding out, as our outside communications were cut off when the veil fell. Our great cities are nearly demolished, the people either killed or enslaved. The gates of hell were thrown open and demons ran amok continent-wide for a while. Humans were at war with them, with each other, and other groups of preternatural creatures. I was 13 when the gate opened in our neighboring state of Missouri, and I remember the night the cemeteries erupted, emptying their long deceased residents into the world of the living. My family and I tried to leave the city after the gate opened, but we were caught in the middle of a firefight between a hastily assembled mob of citizens and the newly resurrected zombies. My father was struck by a stray bullet while trying to get the rest of us out of range, and didn't get up after that. My mother and older brother were killed shortly after that by a group of vampires out for an easy meal. There had been 10 of them, though 2 had shown up after my mom and brother were drained. I remember one of them saying he wanted to turn me. That one had long, white blonde hair, and he'd been breathtakingly handsome. He'd also apparently been stronger than the others were, because they left me alive after he and another black-haired vampire left to dispose of my remaining family. The remaining 8 locked me in a dog cage and tormented me for what felt like days, but I was rescued only 2 hours later by a small team of 6 people. 4 men and 2 women. I have no idea why, but I lied to them when I told them my last name, and I've been going by Malone ever since. The team that saved me that night began to train me, though, when they could, to protect myself, to fight beside them if the need arose. And it did, as they assembled more teams among the ensuing chaos, using what was left of the police force, hospital staff, and recently retired military personnel that were still alive in the city. More and more survivors joined the team as things mellowed, though most were street kids or gang members that had managed in some way to either kill or hide from the beings that attacked them. The cap says the team's purpose is to help the people in my hometown protect themselves from the undead and other preternatural races that would eat them. I think most view it as a way to get revenge, and I don't think the human race can learn to accept these beautifully strange people we now find in our midst. Only time will tell. 13th diary to be located. Diary entry 1, February 10th, 2035. I became a member of the squad when I was 16, and since then I, along with my teammates, have defended our small part of the country from those that would destroy us. We've re-established communications with the rest of the world recently, and learned that the gates had opened everywhere, and that the world was still in near total chaos. The year is now 2035, 13 years after the apocalyptical opening of the gates, and some order has been made from the chaos. Huge walls have been erected around the cities. Biodomes now encapsulate the rich and powerful in the center of each city. Laws have been created to govern the preternatural races that we now find ourselves living side by side with in relative peace. Vampires and other preternatural races have now become citizens of communities worldwide, and for the most part, things are peaceful. We of the squad are still waging a kind of mini-war of our own, though. A war against the beings that have turned criminal, the ones that prey on other citizens for food, or for sport, or for money. We are the only thing that stands between lawful people and the murderers, liars, thieves, and true predators of the night, be they human or zombie, vampire or werewolf, fae or demon. We hunt them, track them, and execute them, for we are judge, jury, and executioners. We are a hodgepodge of mercenaries, former criminals, former army, and police. We are Chicago's last defense against the members of our new society that have gone bad. We have trained in how to effectively hunt all of the different peoples, and we have trained in the various ways to kill them permanently. As a unit, we are effective and efficient, quick and deadly. Our only goal each night or day we go out is to protect the people of our city, no matter who or what they are. To all the lawful citizens, we are known as the Hunters. To those that break the rules, we are known as the Death Watch. And I am proud to be helping rebuild our world one bad guy, one rescued child at a time. Maybe there is hope for us yet, as a race. Part 1. Aaron. Chapter 1. 1 month later, March 10th, 2035. The March night was overcast and dark, with low clouds threatening rain, and the wind was beginning to pick up. Against the backdrop of the sky, the new steel wall around the city looked like a great white blur from street level. The darkness tonight was giving me a bad feeling, and I had gotten it the second the sun set earlier. If I looked up and to the north, I could see the reddish glow of the newly erected biodome in what was now referred to as the court, past the roof lines of the buildings around us, and wondered what made a person want to live their life in a cage. Did they want to forget what was outside the dome? Why hide behind a wall that seemed as flimsy as toilet paper? What was the dome's purpose anyway? It wasn't to keep the supernaturals out. There were plenty of them under the dome. The wall I can understand. It's there to keep the other kingdoms from gaining easy access. So why build a biodome too? The comm crackled with static, and Cap's voice interrupted my musings. It also distracted me from the bad feeling in my gut, and I was grateful for the interruption. I needed to stop thinking for a while. I was just going around in circles in my mind, and needed a break from it before I got dizzy. "You gonna check that alley, Malone? Or just stare at it?" he said. I heard the others laugh and shook my head. On this particular night, I and the original 6 members of the Hunters were out on patrol. Former Police Captain Jude Grayson, former Special Forces, never said what military, Jerry Mayer, former Army Ranger Clint Wallace, former football team captain Frank Rosen, former nurse Tara Dorm, and former pediatrician Fiona Hayes and I were spread out 15 feet apart along the unlit street doing a house-by-house, alley-by-alley check. The formation tonight had been Frank's idea, and the only reason he'd done it was to be my partner again. No way. Cap didn't want Frank dead, and I'd told him flat out that if he partnered me with Frank again, he'd never find the body. Cap must have taken me at my word this time, because he had put Frank on the leading part of the team and put me on the rear part. The supernatural citizens would sometimes throw parties in the abandoned houses or in the alleyways, and it was our job to break them up and send everyone home for the night. Clint, Jerry, and I had the right rear side of the street. Cap, Frank, Fiona, and Tara had the left forward side, where there were apartment buildings that required more than just 2 people to check them out. "Don't worry, Cap, I'm checking it now," I said, and moved, wishing I could wipe the sweat off of my face. But with my helmet on, I couldn't, not without taking it off. I needed the digital map readout it had to keep track of what street we were sweeping, and the last time I took it off while working with Cap Grayson, he chewed me out so bad I hadn't dared do it again. I also wished we were done for the night so I could hit the club and get some dancing done before dawn. Or Clint's thoughts when he was slightly bored drove me nuts. I hated being an alert telepath sometimes. It wasn't easy continually blocking everyone's thoughts, and I picked up more than I wanted to about some of my teammates and friends. Not that I'd tell Cap or any of the others my plans for after work. They'd either give me some line about it not being safe or demand to go with me. I'd rather be somewhere's chew toy than have my downtime ruined by my teammates starting shit with the supernaturals that frequented the club. Though it was a slow night so far for us tonight, most of the troublemakers seemed to be either indoors or elsewhere in the city causing trouble for the other teams that were out on the street tonight. It was pretty much dead out here near the wall, and I was getting a little bored myself. Not as bored as one teammate I could happily kill at the moment, but I was still getting bored. If Merrick and Jace were still my partners, boredom would be the last thing I'd be dealing with tonight. Though, if the truth were to be told, I much preferred being a bit bored and the quiet of tonight, when I compared it to the havoc we had to deal with last week. We had to break up 2 riots on Monday, stop 3 shifter stampedes on Tuesday, arrest 9 humans who were illegally hunting supernaturals on Wednesday, and negotiate territorial disputes between 6 groups of wares on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Give me a peaceful patrol and a little boredom any night of the week over all of that BS. Though if Clint said or thought he was bored about one more time, I was going to shoot him and swear to Cap that it was an accident. He wouldn't believe me, but I would feel better after I did it, and his boredom wouldn't be my only reason for doing it either. His speculation on the color of my underwear was driving me nuts, and I was going to shoot the lech, regardless. I wouldn't kill him, just hurt him a bit. "She's only 26, Jude. You need to let her daydream, or she'll end up like Fiona," Tara said, and again I was brought out of my thoughts. I sighed internally and wondered if I'd ever have a dream that wasn't far off in the future, let alone a daydream that could be made reality. Wet dreams where certain supernatural men were the stars did not count. The night air was hot, wet, and completely still, seeming to cling to my skin and make every breath I took feel as though I was trying to inhale water. I hoped it would rain soon. The humidity was killing me in my gear, and all I wanted right now was a cold shower and some of Indulgence's best ice-cold ale. Finished with the alley, I moved on to the 10-foot-wide backyard, which took all of 1 minute to check, then went to the front of the building and waited for Clint and Jerry to finish with the house. I was glad we had summer back, but did it have to be this hot at... I checked the clock readout in my helmet. At 1:45 in the morning? "Alone, mean, and tricky, you mean?" Clint said a moment later, coming down the front steps with Jerry right behind him, and everyone laughed, except me. I already was mean as a snake and tricky as a fox. I figured it was only a matter of time before I was alone, too. Flashing a wicked, flirtatious grin my way, he sauntered to the next house, and Jerry stopped beside me long enough to place a hand on my shoulder, shaking his head a little. He laughed with me, though, when the barrel of Clint's shotgun caught on the side of the doorway and ruined the effect he was going for by knocking the gun out of his hands. Jerry grinned and went into the house after him. I shook my head again and went to sweep the side yard and alley next to and behind the house. Finished with both in about 2 minutes, I went back to the front to wait for the guys and let my mind wander a bit again. I wondered why neither of them ever wore their helmets like everyone else did. It was one of Cap's golden rules, after all, and everyone was required to wear their helmets. 19 years older than me, Clint was one of the men who had rescued me 13 years ago when my world went to hell, and he had been letting me know, in one way or another, that he wouldn't mind being more than friends with me since I turned 18 7 years ago. He'd also started calling me darlin' and baby since we lost Merrick a month back, and he'd really been pushing it this last week. Jerry was 16 years older than me, and in direct contrast with Clint, he treated me like a kid sister. For my part, I respected him and thought he was a thoughtful, brave, funny, and kind human being, one who had become a treasured brother to me. As for Clint, I liked him as a person and cared about him as a friend and teammate. I thought he was handsome enough to get any female he desired, and I wished him every happiness. But I didn't feel the desire for him that he felt for me. Don't get me wrong. Clint was a wonderful, caring man, and I loved him for it. I thought he was a great friend and a good man to have at my back in a fight. But I wouldn't trade that relationship for any amount of temporary passion we might experience together if we ever became lovers. There had only been 4 men that I had met that I would have considered becoming lovers with, and I was pretty sure none of them were human. Merrick Whiteford, Jason Silverford, Giovanni Avanti, and Alistair McIntyre. 2 had been my partners on the team since I was 16. One of them had died in combat a little over a month ago. The other had disappeared 6 years ago tonight, and I haven't heard from him since. Another was in Europe and had been for 4 years now, and the last was off limits to me for so many reasons it wasn't funny. The biggest reasons behind the man being off limits, though, was that I had no wish to be caged or have my heart broken. Alistair was a man that would outlive me by several centuries, or who could, and probably eventually would, end up permanently dead at the sharp end of a stake. All I had to do was look at him to know, deep down, that he'd break my heart one day, if I was fool enough to fall for him. I may have been raised for the last 13 years by fools, but I wasn't one, and never planned to be one. I missed him when he wasn't around, though, and found myself thinking of him night and day lately. I was afraid that I was falling for him, and that I'd lose him permanently in one way or another. Again, the whole having my heart broken thing didn't appeal to me. I'd gotten a taste of that a month ago, only I'd fallen before I even knew what was happening, and before I could tell him, he died. Never again. No thank you. But I had the feeling that it was already too late to keep from falling for Alistair, too. He was always on my mind, and I kept having these strange dreams. If Cap would ever let Malone off leash, maybe she wouldn't end up like me, Fiona snapped, breaking my chain of thought again, and I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. My life seemed to be up for discussion, yet again tonight. Lovely, not. Couldn't they talk about someone else for a few weeks? Then again, the only other things that wouldn't freak the rest of the team out to talk about were how many base bunnies Frank had screwed this week, and speculation on Jerry's sexual preferences. Neither were topics I wanted to listen to while trying to find non-existent bad guys in teeny tiny yards and small, creepy alleyways. No thank you. I'd rather have my head ripped off by the vampire that haunted my dreams and waking thoughts every night. She came to us mean, so you lot can't blame the Cap for that, Tara said. Cap taught her how to be tricky, though, Frank pointed out, and I caught some of his thoughts. The little bitch is vicious, too, and won't put out for nothing. I curled my lip in disgust and put up a wall to block his thoughts. Alert telepathy sucked sometimes as a gift, though it was better than my uncontrolled telekinesis, and at least with the telepathy I could block out other people's thoughts when I picked them up. The telekinesis, though, was something else altogether and extremely dangerous if I didn't keep it locked down, because I've never had cause to use it. Frank was going to get killed by one of the other women on the teams one day, though, and I, for one, wouldn't blame whoever did it for doing it. It wasn't that Frank was a bad guy. He wasn't. Not really. He was just one of those arrogant guys who were used to women flinging themselves at his feet, and when one woman, or girl, as was the case with me 8 years ago, refused to do anything he asked for the simple privilege of doing his bidding, he got really nasty. The bastard had damn near gotten me sent to Inner City for insubordination, and was still ticked that Cap had let me stay on after we did a security job for a club 2 blocks from Inner City Gate. I had stopped a nut from burning the place to the ground and killing 900 people that night, including us, but that apparently didn't matter to Frank, and I was honestly fine with that. I didn't need his approval to do my job, after all. Rosen, Move up to the next apartment with dorm and check it, Cap said, breaking my train of thought, and I watched two shadows detach from the front of the building across the street and disappear into the shadows of the next one up. I hoped nothing would go wrong tonight, but I'd had a bad feeling ever since the sun went down, and as I watched Frank and Tara enter the building, the feeling got a lot worse. The conversation of my life resumed, and I rolled my eyes, then crossed them as I listened to them discuss my lack of an obvious love life. Seriously, people? I thought, gritting my teeth, and dropped my free hand to rest on my stomach as nausea suddenly crawled up my throat. A burning sensation suddenly banded my throat, and my vision went a little blurry for a second. What the hell? I wondered, and swallowed hard as a hazy memory of a naked Merrick above me surfaced. Memories like this aggravated me, because they were not from this life or this time. And I truly wished that they would stop, because I felt like I was losing my mind, and more often than not, they came with abilities I had no idea how to use. "What are the odds of Fiona getting laid tonight and mellowing out?" I asked after a moment, shaking the memory off. I was hoping to get the topic off of myself and keep it off of my lack of close male-female preferring companions. It worked. The line went nuts with Clint's, Jerry's, and Frank's voices competing with each other and stating odds. Thank Loki men were so easily distracted by the simplest things, like someone else's love life or the latest in firearms technology. I'd move on to guns if this didn't keep 'em busy and off the subject of my love life. Or I could always shoot them all and then hit the club for some dancing and a drink. The brief thought was tempting, but I'd only end up regretting it later. Besides, something was up with me tonight. I'd never felt anything like that burning sensation before, and I really wanted to know what had caused it, so that I could keep it from happening again. The memories I sometimes experienced were easy to deal with and made for great fantasies. But the burning just now? I could do without that. If I had a mark on my throat because of it, I wasn't sure how I'd feel about it. But it wouldn't be the first one to show up over the last 10 years, and I would have some questions for Isaac to try and answer. I loved him like a baby brother, but he'd seen more about this newish world we all now lived in, and might know something about it, or could direct me to someone who could tell me about it. My thoughts were interrupted by the calm, and I brought my full attention back to my surroundings. "Y'all knock it off. I'm trying to work here," Fiona said, and the line went dead quiet, until Frank said, "Fee, darling, if you want to work, you need to find somewhere males, like them boys who was sweet-talking Malone earlier tonight." Then laughter, swearing, and name-calling filled the line as the two bickered. Shaking my head at their antics, I checked the bolt in my crossbow. It wouldn't do if we ran into trouble and the dang thing jammed, or worse, fired but didn't do any real damage. I checked the clip in my gun, too, and figured that if we did run into trouble, I at least had 2 things I could depend on. I used to have 4 things that I could count on. Now I only had my gun and my bow. Well, and Lucy, but she was with a different team tonight, and I wouldn't see her until our patrols were done, and even then, we'd both be too tired to do more than hold each other and pass out. "And one vampire who makes your heart do flips," my conscience prodded. I ignored it, and blocking my teammates' thoughts from my mind, I used my telepathy to cast a sort of psychic net over the area to search for any kind of thought activity nearby. Nothing hostile. Good, I thought, and smiled broadly when I picked up Kane Tanaka's thoughts 6 blocks over. Quickly leaving his thoughts, I let my mind drift to the plans he and I had made before we headed out with our assigned teams. We'd planned to meet up at the club later and talk. He was the only guy on the teams, other than Jace and Merrick, who knew where I went nearly every night after work. Kane also wasn't human. I didn't know exactly what he was, but I could sense that he wasn't human, and figured that the cute Asian guy would tell me someday if I got him drunk enough. You need to be nicer to her, Frankie. You don't want her castrating you while you sleep, do you? Jerry said, eliciting even more laughter and an amen from Clint as they came out of the house. Quit yakking and get back to work, you cheerleaders, and keep your eyes peeled for trouble, Cap ordered, and 5 sarcastic yes sirs filled the line. My more serious one included, though it was nearly lost in the static that followed the others' responses. I continued to check the alleys and yards on our side of the street, though so far tonight we hadn't run across any notable activity. Just a couple of cheetah shifters picking on a hapless were-rat, and 2 werewolves that had been drinking too much and who had, as Frank had said, decided to flirt with me when I tried to send them home. The clank of metal on pavement from the alley one house over caught my attention, and I tightened my grip on my crossbow. I brought it back up into firing position, and leaving Jerry and Clint checking the last house, went to investigate the noise. I hadn't picked up any humanoid thought patterns around this spot, but it never hurt to check anyway. What are we going to do if we find one of those creatures of Graven's here? I asked, suddenly remembering the horrifying reports we had received 2 weeks ago and speaking quietly into the communications link as I carefully checked the alley. Finding what I expected a moment later, nothing, I moved back to the previous house and waited for Clint and Jerry to join me. Deal with it, I suppose. And didn't I just tell you to quit yakking, girl? Cap Grayson said. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir, I said, and fell silent again. But then I didn't have to say anything more. I knew the others would continue where I left off. How though? You read the reports. How are we supposed to take on something designed to take out demons and other night crawlers? Jerry asked, joining me in front of the house. Nothing in House 14. I agree with Mayor. How are we supposed to do that, boss man? Clint said, walking past us and into the next house. Jerry followed him, and I moved to the small backyard and proceeded to check it. I'd already cleared the alley, and the yard would only take a minute to clear. A shrub rustled faintly, and when I looked, the infrared showed the shape of a house cat. Shaking my head, I scanned the rest of the bushes and saw 2 more cats. We'd be the first team to encounter it, if one showed up here in the outer city, Tara said. She was right, and it was something I had brought up with Cap repeatedly over the last 2 weeks. Part of my paranoia tonight was because of that worry, and my bad feeling wasn't going away. In fact, it was getting worse the closer we got to 13th Street just ahead. Can it? I got something here, Frank said, and I quickly left the yard and its cats. I looked up the street and to the right, seeing him just at the mouth of the alley next to the apartment building he and Tara were checking. He was supposed to stay in there until they had checked every floor and room, but it looked like he had left his partner on her own again. When we got back to base, Cap was gonna rip him a new one. Again. I liked Frank as a teammate, but he could be a jerk of a human being sometimes. The bad feeling I'd had all evening blossomed into full-blown dread suddenly, and I held my breath as I watched his shadow, praying that I was wrong, knowing I wasn't. I'd had this kind of feeling before, and it had never been wrong. Not once. What do you see, Frank? Grayson asked, motioning from down the street for me to hold my position. I didn't want to hold my position, damn it. I wanted to get up there and keep Frank from doing something stupid, like going into the alley alone. I stayed where I was, though, watching and waiting for the go-ahead. Clint and Jerry joined me on the sidewalk a moment later, then stood to either side of me and looked up the street at that alley with me. I shivered and felt my stomach tying itself in knots. "I'm not too sure, boss. It kinda looks like a robot, only it has what looks like a body in it," he said. My heart skipped a beat at hearing that, then started to pound and my mouth went dry. Beside me, I felt the guys tense and heard them grip their weapons tighter. "Sounds like what the boys in Oregon told us about," Tara said warily. "Is it, Frankie? Is it one of those things?" Fiona asked nervously. "I just said I wasn't sure what it is. I'm going to check it out," he said, and I watched his shadowed form move out of sight into the alley. Ice began to form in my veins, and my breathing slowed as I tried to touch his mind pathically, only to be blocked by someone else. "Rosen, hold position until the rest of the team gets up there," Cap ordered. "Don't worry, boss, I got this," he said. I closed my eyes for a second and sent up a prayer that we'd all live to see daybreak, then pushed at the block on his mind. The sound of gunfire and his screams of agony a second later broke my concentration and would haunt my dreams for a long time to come. I was certain of it. I opened my eyes and saw Tara's form quickly leave the apartment building and enter the alley as I ran forward. Clint, Jerry, and I began running toward the alley as soon as we heard the shots. Cap Grayson and Fiona were only steps behind us. But when we all got there, we were already too late to help him. Tearing around the corner, I nearly collided with Tara, who was standing about halfway down the alley, with her gun up and aimed toward the shadows beyond the one working streetlight in the alleyway. But she wasn't shooting yet. Instead, she was staring at the ground and walls around her in horror. Stepping past her a bit with Clint and Jerry one step behind me, I let my bow hang from its strap, drew my gun, and looked around. We had only been seconds behind him, and yet there was almost nothing left of him. There was blood splattered all over the floor and walls of the alleyway. There were pieces of other matter and chunks of what my mind told me had to be flesh and bone hanging from the fire escape of the building to my left. The shadows shifted, and I saw a glint of metal in the faint light of the street lamp. The thing moved just enough to stand in the middle of the alley under the light. Covered in blood, it looked huge and horrible, but I only glanced at it. I trusted the others to give me warning if it moved any closer as I continued to take in what I was seeing, and I was taking in more than my stomach wanted to handle. Frank's treasured .45 revolver was lying in a pool of blood. His helmet was crushed and laying near a dumpster. I assumed that his head, or what was left of it anyway, was still in it and felt bile curl up my throat. It took me only a few seconds to register all of this, and in the next I heard Cap give the order to shoot. I didn't hesitate before I aimed up and started firing on the giant metal monstrosity that had just killed my teammate. I heard the rest of the team open fire on it a second after me and wondered if I had physically heard Cap's order or if I'd responded to his thoughts. It didn't matter right now, but I needed to figure out which one it was and keep from doing it again. The roar of Clint's shotgun and Jerry's .38 damn near deafened me. They were standing so close to me, and I wished briefly that their guns were a 50 cal sniper rifle and a 30mm handgun. Over the sound of gunfire, I could hear Cap swearing, and between shots I heard Fiona screaming. But Tara was strangely quiet as she fired at the creature. I only knew she was firing because I could hear the rat-a-tat-tat of her machine gun over the other guns firing. She usually yelled profanity when fighting, and when I glanced at her, I saw that her mouth was open in a silent scream of rage. I peeked into her mind and quickly retreated again. She'd be fine, eventually. This was a perfect example of why I never wanted to get romantically involved with a man I might have to work with, I thought, as I watched our bullets fly toward the thing, and saw a few get past the metal frame. But our shots didn't seem to be having any effect on it. If anything, all they did was get its attention, because it began moving toward us. I aimed for where its heart should have been and fired. The bullet ricocheted off of something, a metal plate, I think, because it sparked, and the round hit Clint in the left shoulder. His grunt of pain was the only indication he gave that he was hit, and I glanced at him briefly as he readjusted his shotgun to rest on his other shoulder and continued to fire. Though I could see his shots were going off the mark a bit, he was still hitting it in the main part of the body most of the time, and that was probably a good thing, as my next shot ricocheted off of it too, and took out the only street lamp in the alley, plunging us into darkness. The night just went from bad to worse after that. The night vision and thermal sensors in our helmets couldn't get a reading on the damn thing, and our helmets didn't seem to be doing any damage to it. As the pilot was a zombie, it had no thoughts that I could invade and take control of to stop it. We were literally shooting in the dark without the benefit of being able to see our target, and I knew we were essentially screwed 6 ways to hell now. "They shields up and fall back, we need to regroup," Grayson yelled. Flipping my shield up, I continued to fire as I started moving backwards with Clint on my right and Jerry on my left, both men moving in sync with me as we fell back as ordered. Grayson ordered a full retreat just as we reached the end of the alley, but before we could move out into the street, the thing reached from the darkness and grabbed hold of him, ripping him apart before we could react. His final order ringing in my ears, and his last thought hanging in my head, I grabbed the back of Clint and Jerry's vests while screaming at the other two to run. The fact that Clint hadn't given the orders didn't seem to matter to them as they took off down the street at a dead run. Jerry hesitated for a second, then he took off after the girls, leaving Clint and me to guard the rear. I knew Clint was losing too much blood as he ran beside me, but I didn't have time to worry about his wound right now.